The day a billionaire invites a waitress into a boardroom, somebody is about to learn a lesson they never expected. On a gray Manhattan morning, Simone Carter stood outside the glass tower of Vail Global Holdings and checked the email for the fourth time. The message was still there. The invitation was still real. She adjusted the sleeve of her navy blazer, borrowed from a friend, and looked up at the building that seemed to disappear into the clouds above New York City. Nothing about this made sense. 2 days earlier, she had been carrying trays through the dining room of the Grand Harbor restaurant. Now she was standing at the headquarters of one of the most powerful companies in America. Daniel Brooks had insisted she go. If Harrison Vail personally invited you, there's a reason, he had said. Simone still wasn't convinced. She stepped through the revolving doors and immediately felt out of place. Executives moved through the lobby with purpose. Expensive shoes clicked across polished marble floors. Large digital displays showed company reports, market updates, and corporate announcements. Everything looked precise, controlled, calculated, much like the man who ran it. Harrison Vail. The CEO was not someone Simone knew well, but their paths had crossed enough times that she no longer viewed him as a stranger. She had seen glimpses of the person behind the reputation. Still, she could not imagine why he wanted her in a board meeting. A receptionist greeted her politely and directed her to a private elevator. As the doors closed, Simone felt her heartbeat quicken. She reminded herself to stay calm. Whatever happened, she would handle it with dignity. That was something life had taught her long ago. 20 floors above, a conference room larger than most apartments waited behind a pair of polished wooden doors. The assistant outside smiled and opened them for her. Conversation stopped almost instantly. Simone stepped inside and felt dozens of eyes turn toward her. Around the massive table sat senior leaders of Vail Global Holdings. Some glanced at tablets. Others exchanged curious looks. A few openly stared. Simone recognized Olivia Reed near the far end of the room. The executive's expression revealed surprise, but little else. Olivia was always difficult to read. At the head of the table sat Harrison Vail. His posture was straight. His expression calm. His attention seemed fixed on a document in front of him. He looked up briefly as Simone entered. Their eyes met for a moment. Then he gave a small nod toward an empty seat. No explanation. No introduction. Just a seat waiting for her. Simone sat down carefully. The room remained unusually quiet. One board member leaned toward another and whispered something. A second person frowned while scrolling through a meeting agenda. A third appeared genuinely confused. Simone noticed that her name was not listed anywhere in the materials placed before them. That fact only deepened the mystery. Minutes passed. More executives entered. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Several people continued looking at Simone as if trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, one board member cleared his throat and glanced toward Harrison. "Mr. Vail," he said, "I assume there's a reason we have a guest today?" Harrison folded his hands calmly. "There is. Nothing more." The answer seemed to create more questions than it resolved. Simone noticed a few exchanged glances around the table. Curiosity was turning into discomfort. Somewhere beyond the conference room windows, New York moved through another busy morning. Inside, however, everything felt suspended, as if the room were waiting for something, or someone. Simone sat quietly, refusing to show uncertainty. Whatever reason had brought her here would reveal itself soon enough. But as more members of the board arrived and took their seats, recognition began appearing on several faces. One executive narrowed his eyes. Another tilted his head. Then a woman near the middle of the table suddenly whispered something to the man beside her. His eyebrows rose. Slowly, a smile appeared. And for the first time since Simone entered the room, a few people began to understand exactly where they had seen her before. The smile on the executive's face spread quickly to the people around him. Within moments, whispers moved across the long boardroom table like a wave. Simone remained seated, her hands folded neatly in front of her, while more and more faces began connecting her presence to a familiar image. They had seen her carrying trays at the Grand Harbor restaurant. They had seen her taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and greeting customers. To them, that was all she was. One board member leaned back in his chair and laughed softly. "Now I remember," he said. "She works at that restaurant downtown." Another executive smiled. "That is where I know her from." Several heads turned toward Simone. The room's curiosity was evolving into something less respectful. Simone felt it immediately. She had experienced this kind of attention before, not because of who she was, but because people often decided who she was before she ever spoke. Across the table, Olivia Reed quietly observed the reactions. Her expression remained professional, but she noticed the growing shift in tone. Harrison Vale noticed it too. He sat silently at the head of the table, saying nothing. His face revealed little. One executive adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Simone. "Forgive me," he said with a chuckle, "but I am trying to understand this meeting agenda." A few people smiled. "Are we reviewing quarterly performance today or restaurant service standards?" A handful of executives laughed. Simone remained calm. She had learned years ago that dignity was often strongest when it did not need to defend itself. The laughter faded after a few seconds, but the atmosphere had changed. Another board member joined in. "Perhaps Mr. Vale has discovered a revolutionary hiring strategy." More smiles appeared. "Maybe our future board appointments will come from the lunch menu." This time the laughter grew louder. Some people exchanged amused looks. Others seemed uncomfortable but stayed silent. Olivia lowered her eyes toward her notes. Daniel Brooks had once told Simone something she never forgot. The easiest way to reveal someone's character is to give them a room full of people they think are beneath them. The memory returned now. Simone kept her posture straight. She refused to give anyone the reaction they seemed to want. At the far end of the table, one executive shook his head. "No offense intended," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I am simply curious what qualifications are required for this discussion." The room grew quieter. Several people waited for Simone to respond. Others looked toward Harrison, expecting him to explain. But the CEO remained silent. His eyes moved briefly across the table before returning to the documents in front of him. The lack of explanation seemed to encourage some of the executives even more. One woman laughed lightly. "Perhaps she is here to provide customer feedback." More chuckles followed. Simone could feel every eye in the room. Yet something surprised her. She was not angry. She was disappointed. Not because they doubted her, but because so many intelligent people seemed eager to underestimate someone they did not know. Olivia finally looked toward Harrison. She expected him to intervene. He did not. His expression remained calm, controlled, almost unreadable. That silence became its own source of tension. The longer he remained quiet, the more uncertain the room became. Some executives appeared emboldened. Others seemed increasingly nervous. They knew Harrison Vale rarely allowed disorder inside his boardroom. Yet he continued watching, listening, measuring. One board member finally leaned forward and addressed Simone directly. "I am sure there is a fascinating explanation for all this." His smile widened. "Would you mind telling us exactly why you are here?" Every conversation stopped. The room fell silent. Simone felt dozens of eyes lock onto her. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched endlessly beneath the morning sun. Inside, however, the entire boardroom seemed frozen in anticipation. For the first time since entering the meeting, Simone understood that this was no longer about an invitation. It was becoming a test. The only question was who was actually being tested. The question hung in the air long after the executive finished speaking. Every face in the boardroom remained fixed on Simone Carter. Some appeared amused. Others looked impatient. A few seemed genuinely curious. Simone glanced briefly toward Harrison Vale. The Billionaire CEO remained silent. His expression had not changed. Whatever answer came next, he clearly intended for it to come from her. Simone took a slow breath and folded her hands on the conference table. "Honestly," she said calmly, "I do not know exactly why I was invited." Several people exchanged satisfied smiles. One executive leaned back as if that answer had confirmed everything he already believed. But Simone continued. "However, I do know that if someone as busy as Mr. Vale asked me to be here, there is probably a reason." The room grew slightly quieter. Her voice was steady, confident without being arrogant. One board member smiled sarcastically. "That is an admirable level of faith." More laughter followed. Another executive adjusted his tie and spoke up. "Since we are all trying to understand today's agenda, perhaps we can make this productive." He tapped a financial report sitting in front of him. "Tell me, Ms. Carter, how familiar are you with corporate growth strategy?" Several people looked entertained by the question. Simone recognized the trap immediately. The executive did not expect an answer. He expected embarrassment. "Not as familiar as the people in this room," she replied honestly. The executive nodded as though he had won some invisible contest. Then he opened a presentation displayed on the large screen behind him. Charts, projections, and revenue forecasts filled the room. "Excellent," he said. "Then perhaps you can help us solve a problem we have been discussing for months." A few people laughed quietly. Olivia Reed looked down at her notes again. She was beginning to dislike where the conversation was heading. The executive pointed toward a chart. "Customer retention has slowed in several divisions. We have reviewed data, surveys, and consulting reports. What would you do?" More smiles appeared around the table. To them, the challenge was absurd. They were asking a waitress to solve a problem that highly paid analysts had struggled with for months. Simone studied the screen. She said nothing for several seconds. The silence stretched long enough that some executives began smirking again. Then she spoke. "Can I ask a question?" First, the executive looked surprised. "Of course." Simone pointed toward a section of the presentation. "How often do senior leadership teams actually speak directly with customers?" The room became still. The executive blinked. "We review customer data continuously." Simone nodded politely. "That is not what I asked." A few smiles disappeared. Simone continued. "How often do you sit down with them? Listen to them? Watch how they make decisions?" Nobody answered immediately. Simone looked around the room. "At the Grand Harbor restaurant, I meet hundreds of people every week. Business owners, families, tourists, investors. People tell servers things they never tell surveys." The room remained silent. Sometimes customers leave because of price. Sometimes because of convenience. But most of the time they leave because they stop feeling seen. The executive's smile began fading. Simone continued speaking naturally, as if she were discussing ordinary observations from a restaurant shift. "People stay loyal when they believe someone understands them. Data tells you what happened. Conversations often tell you why." Several board members exchanged glances. Even Olivia looked up now. The atmosphere had changed. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. Simone was not pretending to be an expert. She was simply sharing something she had learned from years of paying attention to people. One executive finally laughed again, though it sounded less confident than before. "Interesting philosophy." Another joined him. "Very inspiring." A few others followed with polite chuckles. The tension broke. The room returned to its earlier rhythm. Yet something was different now. The laughter felt forced. Because for a brief moment, everyone had stopped laughing. For a brief moment, they had actually listened. Simone noticed it. Olivia noticed it. And at the head of the table, Harrison Vale noticed it too. He slowly closed the report in front of him and looked around the room, saying nothing. The silence that followed somehow felt louder than any words he could have spoken. The silence after Simone's answer lingered longer than anyone expected. A few executives shifted in their seats. Others returned their attention to tablets and reports, pretending the moment had not happened. Yet the atmosphere inside the boardroom had changed in a way that was difficult to ignore. The confidence that had fueled the earlier jokes no longer seemed quite as strong. Simone remained composed. She had not come to impress anyone. She had simply answered a question. At the head of the table, Harrison Vale finally spoke for the first time in nearly an hour. "Let us continue." His voice was calm and measured. The meeting moved forward. Financial reports appeared on screens. Department heads delivered updates. Market forecasts were discussed. But Simone noticed something unusual. Several times during the presentations, Harrison asked questions that had very little to do with numbers. He asked about customer behavior, trust, loyalty, perception, human decisions. The same theme Simone had just mentioned. Each time, executives rushed to provide answers filled with statistics and technical language. Harrison listened carefully, but rarely seemed satisfied. As the discussion continued, Simone's mind drifted briefly to the first time she had met Harrison months earlier at the Grand Harbor restaurant. He had arrived late in the evening after what appeared to be a difficult day. Most customers in expensive suits treated restaurant staff as if they were invisible. Harrison had not. He had noticed details. He had listened. That memory returned now because the questions he was asking sounded familiar. They sounded like someone searching for something beyond spreadsheets. Across the room, one executive launched into a lengthy presentation about declining engagement among younger customers. Charts filled the screen. Forecasts stretched years into the future. After several minutes, Harrison interrupted. "What do customers actually say?" The executive blinked. "The survey data indicates." Harrison raised a hand. Not the survey. The room became quiet again. What do they say? No one answered immediately. Harrison's gaze moved slowly around the table. Then something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced in Simone's mind. About 6 weeks earlier, Harrison had visited the Grand Harbor restaurant. The dinner rush had been overwhelming. Every table had been full. Customers had waited nearly 40 minutes for seating. One frustrated businessman had complained loudly about service delays. Another customer had joined the criticism. Before the situation escalated, Simone had spoken with them. She listened. She asked questions. Within minutes, both customers had calmed down. Harrison had witnessed the entire interaction while waiting for a meeting. Later that evening, as Simone refilled his coffee, he had asked a simple question. How did you do that? Simone remembered smiling. People want to feel heard before they want solutions. Harrison had not responded immediately. Instead, he had studied her answer with the same focus he now showed during board meetings. Back in the present, the executive continued explaining charts and projections. Harrison listened without expression. Then his eyes briefly shifted toward Simone. The glance lasted less than a second, but Olivia Reed noticed it. Olivia sat quietly as pieces of a puzzle began connecting in her mind. She remembered reports Harrison had circulated over recent months. New initiatives emphasizing customer trust. New language about relationships instead of transactions. Ideas that had seemed unusual for a company obsessed with growth metrics. Suddenly, she wondered where some of those ideas had originated. Another executive began speaking. More forecasts. More analysis. Yet the room no longer felt entirely in control of the narrative. The board believed they were evaluating Simone. In reality, something else was happening. Something none of them fully understood. Harrison folded his hands and looked toward the large windows overlooking Manhattan. His thoughts briefly returned to that evening at the Grand Harbor restaurant. The exhausted customers. The crowded dining room. Simone's calm confidence. Most people solved problems by speaking. She had solved them by listening. That single observation had stayed with him for weeks. The executives around the table continued debating strategy, unaware that the reason Simone Carter sat among them had begun long before today's meeting. And as the discussion moved forward, Harrison remained silent once again, allowing the board to reveal more about themselves with every passing minute. The meeting moved into its third hour, and patience around the boardroom table was beginning to wear thin. The executives had arrived expecting discussions about acquisitions, growth targets, and shareholder expectations. Instead, an uncomfortable tension had settled over the room. Simone Carter remained seated quietly among them, saying little and observing everything. The more composed she appeared, the more irritated certain members of the board seemed to become. One executive finally pushed his chair back slightly and sighed. With all due respect, Harrison, we still have not received a clear explanation. Several heads nodded in agreement. Harrison Vale looked up from a report, but said nothing. The executive continued. This board is responsible for billions of dollars in decisions every year. Surely there is a reason a restaurant employee is sitting in strategic meetings. The room fell silent again. Harrison simply replied, "Continue with the agenda." The answer frustrated several people. Another executive shook his head. "I do not understand why we are pretending this is normal." A few murmurs of agreement followed. Olivia Reed remained quiet, though she could sense the atmosphere becoming increasingly dangerous for the people creating it. They believed they were challenging Simone. In reality, they were challenging Harrison's judgment. Yet they seemed too focused on Simone to realize it. The next presentation began. A division leader reviewed customer engagement numbers and projected future performance. Halfway through the report, he displayed a chart illustrating customer satisfaction trends. As discussion opened, one board member glanced toward Simone and smirked. "Perhaps we should ask the hospitality expert." Several people laughed. The joke landed harder than previous ones because the room had grown comfortable with the pattern. Another executive joined in. "Excellent idea. She probably has more experience carrying menus than analyzing markets." More laughter followed. Simone kept her expression neutral. She had heard variations of those assumptions before. What disappointed her was not the insult itself. It was how easily accomplished people revealed their insecurities when confronted with someone different from themselves. Across the table, Olivia's jaw tightened slightly. Even she could no longer ignore how far the comments had gone. Then came the moment that changed everything. A senior board member, One of the most influential people in the company leaned forward with an amused smile. "You know," he said, looking directly at Simone, "this entire situation feels like a publicity stunt. Maybe next quarter we can invite random customers to help run the company. After all, if serving coffee qualifies someone for executive discussions, perhaps expertise no longer matters." The room erupted into laughter. Louder than before, longer than before. Some executives lowered their eyes. Others openly enjoyed the moment. Simone felt every gaze in the room, yet she refused to react. Her dignity remained intact. She simply sat there, calm and composed, while the laughter echoed around her. Then something happened. Harrison Vale's expression changed. It was subtle at first. The faint trace of patience that had remained on his face disappeared. His eyes hardened. His posture straightened. The smile he had occasionally worn throughout the morning was gone. One by one, people noticed. The laughter weakened. A few executives stopped immediately. Others continued for another second before realizing nobody else was laughing anymore. Within moments, the room became completely silent. Harrison slowly placed his pen on the table. The small sound seemed louder than the laughter had been. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the executive who had delivered the insult looked uncertain now. Harrison's gaze traveled across the boardroom. Not quickly, not angrily, deliberately, measuring every face, every reaction, every choice people had made throughout the morning. Simone noticed it too. This was the first time all day that Harrison appeared genuinely disappointed. The silence stretched for several long seconds. Nobody dared interrupt it. Finally, Harrison looked directly at the executive who had spoken. His voice was calm, controlled, far more intimidating than anger. "Enough." The single word landed with the weight of a verdict. And for the first time since Simone entered the boardroom, several members of the board realized they might have misunderstood the purpose of this meeting entirely. No one spoke after Harrison Vale said the word. The silence settled over the boardroom like a sudden change in weather. The executives who had been laughing only moments earlier now avoided eye contact with one another. Even the city beyond the windows seemed distant. Harrison remained seated for several seconds, allowing the weight of the moment to fully settle. Then he slowly stood. Every person at the table followed him with their eyes. Simone Carter remained still. She had never seen this side of him before. Calm authority was one thing. Controlled disappointment was something else entirely. Harrison placed both hands lightly on the table. "I have listened carefully all morning," he said. His voice was quiet, forcing everyone to pay attention. "I have listened to assumptions. I have listened to conclusions. I have listened to people judge someone they do not know." No one interrupted. Harrison looked toward the executive who had made the last remark. "Tell me something." The man straightened slightly. "Of course." Harrison nodded toward Simone. "What specifically makes her unqualified to sit in this room?" The executive hesitated. "That is not exactly what I said." "Then answer the question." The man shifted uncomfortably. "She does not have corporate experience." Harrison looked around the table. "How many of you agree?" Several hands did not move, but several faces clearly did. Harrison nodded again. "Interesting." He walked slowly along one side of the table. "Then perhaps someone can explain why this company continues struggling to understand customers despite employing hundreds of executives with corporate experience." The room became silent again. No one volunteered an answer. Harrison continued. "Perhaps someone can explain why customer trust scores improved after recommendations that many of you initially dismissed." Olivia Reed's attention sharpened immediately. She knew exactly which recommendations he meant. Harrison stopped and looked toward the large screen displaying company metrics. For the last 6 months, this company has implemented changes that increased customer retention, improved service ratings, and strengthened brand loyalty. Several executives nodded cautiously. Those results were well known. Harrison turned toward them. "Do you know where some of those ideas originated?" Nobody answered. Harrison finally looked at Simone. Not as a curiosity, not as a guest, as someone whose presence belonged in the conversation. The Grand Harbor restaurant. A visible wave of confusion moved through the room. Harrison continued before anyone could speak. "Months ago I observed something. While many of you analyze customers through reports, Simone Carter interacts with them every day. She listens to frustrations, expectations, decisions, concerns." He paused. "She understands something data alone cannot always reveal." Olivia slowly leaned back in her chair as several pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The customer-first language, the emphasis on trust, the strategic shifts. Suddenly they looked different. Harrison continued walking. Many of the ideas you praised in recent executive reviews began as observations from conversations I had with Simone. This time the silence was absolute. The executive who had mocked her earlier looked stunned. Another stared down at the table. A third looked toward Simone with an expression that had completely lost its amusement. Harrison's voice remained measured. Not because she claimed to be an expert. Not because she asked for influence. Because she pays attention. Simone felt every eye return to her. But this time the energy was different. The certainty that had fueled the earlier laughter was gone. Harrison stopped beside his chair. The irony of this morning is remarkable. He folded his arms. Many of you spent hours discussing customer understanding while demonstrating how quickly you dismiss people whose experiences differ from your own. No one challenged him. No one could. Olivia finally spoke. Her tone was professional but sincere. I believe we may have underestimated the purpose of today's meeting. Harrison looked at her and gave a small nod. Yes, I believe many people did. Across the room, several executives appeared genuinely uneasy now. For the first time all day, they seemed less concerned about Simone's qualifications and more concerned about their own behavior. Simone glanced briefly toward Harrison. He met her eyes for a moment. There was no smile, no dramatic gesture, only respect. And somehow that meant more. Then Harrison looked back at the board and said, "Now that we have established why Simone Carter is here, perhaps we can begin discussing what truly matters." The room remained quiet long after Harrison finished speaking. The confidence that had once filled the boardroom had been replaced by uncertainty. Executives who had arrived expecting to evaluate strategies now found themselves evaluating their own choices. Simone Carter could feel the shift. Nobody was looking at her the same way anymore. Not because she had demanded respect, because the assumptions surrounding her had begun to collapse under their own weight. Harrison returned to his seat, but did not reopen the meeting agenda. Instead, he folded his hands and looked around the table. There is something else you should know. Several executives straightened immediately. The tone of his voice suggested that the morning's revelations were not yet complete. Harrison glanced toward the large screen and nodded to an assistant standing near the wall. A new presentation appeared. The title contained only 3 words: Leadership Evaluation Review. Confused expressions spread across the room. Olivia Reed looked toward Harrison. This presentation had never appeared on the official agenda. Harrison allowed the silence to linger for a moment before speaking. Many of you assumed today's purpose was strategic planning. He paused. It was not. The confusion deepened. Harrison continued. The primary purpose of today's meeting was observation. Several executives exchanged nervous looks. One board member frowned. Observation of what? Harrison's answer came immediately. Leadership. The word landed heavily. Harrison stood again and walked slowly toward the screen. Over the last year, Vail Global Holdings has invested heavily in improving customer trust, employee engagement, and organizational culture. We have discussed values repeatedly. He looked directly at several members of the board. Yet values only matter when they are tested. Nobody interrupted. Harrison pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The screen changed. Several bullet points appeared. Respect, judgment, curiosity, humility, listening. These are leadership principles this company claims to believe in. His gaze moved across the room. Today I wanted to see whether those principles existed only in presentations or in practice. The meaning became clear almost instantly. Simone noticed several executives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Harrison had not invited her simply because of her insights. He had invited her because her presence revealed something about everyone else. Olivia slowly exhaled. Now the entire day made sense. Harrison turned toward the board. No one was asked to impress me this morning. No one was asked to solve a financial problem. The challenge was much simpler. His voice remained calm. Treat another human being with respect. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. One executive lowered his eyes. Another stared at the table. Harrison continued. Some of you succeeded. His gaze briefly passed over Olivia. Some of you chose caution when you did not have enough information. Then he looked toward others. Some of you chose curiosity. Finally, his eyes settled on several members of the board who had spent the morning making jokes. And some of you revealed far more than you intended. No one argued. No one could. The evidence was sitting in their own memories. At that moment, the conference room doors opened quietly. Every head turned. Eleanor Vale entered the room. Harrison's mother carried herself with calm confidence, the kind that came from decades of experience. She greeted the room politely before taking a seat near the front. Several executives looked surprised by her appearance. Eleanor rarely attended board meetings. Harrison nodded respectfully toward her. Perfect timing. Eleanor smiled faintly. I have been listening from the executive suite. The room became even more uncomfortable. Several board members suddenly realized there had been more observers than they thought. Eleanor's eyes moved toward Simone. Warmth immediately appeared in her expression. Ms. Carter. Simone smiled politely. Mrs. Vale. Eleanor nodded. It is good to see you again. The familiarity between them only deepened the confusion around the table. Eleanor looked toward the board. For what it is worth, I understand exactly why Harrison invited her here. No one spoke. Eleanor continued. Character reveals itself when people believe there is nothing to gain from kindness. The statement settled over the room like a final piece of evidence. Harrison remained silent while his mother spoke. He did not need to defend his decision anymore. The board was beginning to understand it for themselves. And as the realization spread through the room, several executives quietly began wondering whether the consequences of today's lesson were only beginning. The atmosphere inside the boardroom was completely different now. The confidence that had fueled the morning's jokes had disappeared, replaced by reflection and unease. Nobody seemed interested in making clever comments anymore. Harrison Vale returned to his seat, while Eleanor Vale remained quietly observant. Simone Carter could sense that the meeting had crossed an invisible line. What had begun as judgment had become accountability. Harrison looked around the table before speaking. This company will continue discussing financial performance and strategic growth. He paused briefly. But culture is not separate from performance. Culture determines performance. Several executives nodded silently. Others avoided eye contact. Harrison activated another slide. This one contained no names, no rankings, and no accusations. Instead, it outlined a series of upcoming leadership initiatives, mentorship programs, customer engagement requirements, leadership evaluation criteria, community involvement expectations. The message was clear. Vale Global Holdings was moving in a new direction. Beginning next quarter, Harrison said, executive advancement will be measured by more than results. Leadership behavior will matter equally. That announcement immediately captured everyone's attention. For years, promotions and influence had largely depended on numbers. Now the standard was changing. Olivia Reed studied the presentation carefully. The more she read, the more she understood what Harrison was trying to build. He was not reacting emotionally to today's events. He had been planning these changes for months. Today's meeting had simply confirmed why they were necessary. One executive finally spoke. His tone was noticeably more respectful than earlier. Will these evaluations impact project assignments? Harrison answered without hesitation. Yes. The room became quiet again. Another executive asked, will they affect leadership opportunities? Harrison nodded. Yes. No one needed further explanation. The consequences were not dramatic. No one was being publicly punished. Yet everyone understood that future opportunities would now depend on how people treated others, not just how they managed numbers. Eleanor smiled slightly. It was the kind of decision she had hoped her son would make. Strong leadership was not simply about power. It was about responsibility. Across the city, life continued as normal. But inside the boardroom, careers were quietly being reshaped. Several executives who had spent the morning mocking Simone now looked deeply uncomfortable. Not because Harrison had humiliated them. He had not. Their discomfort came from realizing they had exposed themselves. Olivia eventually turned toward Simone. I owe you an apology. The room immediately noticed. Olivia was not known for offering apologies casually. Simone looked surprised. Olivia continued. I was not one of the people making jokes, but I should have spoken sooner. Simone considered her words before responding. Thank you. The exchange was simple, but it carried weight. Respect often begins with accountability. Harrison observed the moment without interrupting. Nearby, another executive quietly admitted that he had made assumptions. Others followed. Not all of them spoke publicly, but the shift in attitude was visible. The boardroom no longer viewed Simone as an outsider sitting in the wrong seat. They were beginning to recognize her as someone whose perspective mattered. Later that afternoon, after the formal meeting finally ended, news of the unusual session began spreading through the company. Employees discussed it in hallways. Managers shared observations in private conversations. Stories traveled quickly inside large organizations. By early evening, Marcus Carter received a call from Daniel Brooks at the Grand Harbor restaurant. Daniel had heard fragments of what happened through professional contacts. "Your sister handled herself exactly the way I knew she would," Daniel said proudly. Marcus smiled. For a long time, he had remained cautious about Harrison Vale. Powerful people often disappointed him. But hearing what happened today challenged some of those assumptions. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, 9-year-old Sophia Bennett sat with Eleanor after school. Eleanor shared a simplified version of the day's events. Sophia listened carefully. When Eleanor finished, Sophia smiled. "That sounds like Simone." Eleanor laughed softly. "What does that mean?" Sophia shrugged. "She is always nice to people, even when they are not nice first." Eleanor looked out the window for a moment. Sometimes wisdom arrived in the simplest observations. Back at corporate headquarters, Simone prepared to leave the building. Yet one question continued lingering in her mind. She understood why Harrison respected her. She understood why he invited her to the meeting. What she still could not understand was why he seemed willing to risk so much to defend her. And as the sun began setting over Manhattan, that unanswered question stayed with her. The executive floor had grown quiet by the time Simone Carter stepped out of the boardroom. Most employees had already left for the evening, and the golden light of sunset reflected across the glass towers of Manhattan. She carried nothing with her except unanswered questions. The elevator doors opened, and she entered alone. Just before they closed, a familiar voice spoke. "Hold the door." Harrison Vale stepped inside. For several seconds, neither of them said anything. The elevator descended in silence. It was not uncomfortable. It was simply honest. After everything that had happened, neither seemed interested in small talk. Finally, Simone looked toward him. "Can I ask you something?" Harrison nodded. "Of course." Simone hesitated briefly. "Why did you do it?" Harrison understood immediately. "Invite you." Simone shook her head. "No. Any of that." She looked directly at him. "You could have explained everything from the beginning. You could have avoided the entire situation." Harrison considered the question carefully. "I could have." "Then why did you not?" The elevator continued downward. Harrison watched the city lights beyond the glass walls before answering. "Because numbers are easy." Simone frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Harrison smiled faintly. "Anyone can claim they value people. Anyone can write it in a company report. Anyone can put it on a presentation slide." His expression grew more serious. "What matters is what happens when there is nothing to gain." Simone listened quietly. Harrison continued. "The board needed to see something. More importantly, they needed to reveal something." The elevator reached the lobby, but neither moved immediately. Harrison looked at her. "You did not change who you were when people underestimated you." Simone lowered her eyes briefly. "I was not trying to prove anything." "Exactly." Harrison's answer came without hesitation. "That is why it mattered." They stepped into the lobby together. The evening crowd moved through the building around them, but neither seemed in a hurry to leave. Simone thought about everything that had happened throughout the day. The jokes, the assumptions, the silence. The moment Harrison finally spoke. "You know," she said softly. "For a while I thought you were just watching." Harrison nodded. "I was." Simone looked surprised by the honesty. Harrison continued. "I wanted to see whether people would choose respect without being forced to." He paused. "Most leadership problems are not intelligence problems. They are character problems." Simone smiled slightly. "That sounds like something Eleanor would say." Harrison laughed quietly. "That is because she has been saying it for 30 years. For the first time all day, the tension between them disappeared completely. They walked toward the front entrance together. Outside, New York City glowed beneath the evening sky. Cars moved through busy streets. Restaurant lights illuminated sidewalks. Life continued as normal. Yet something between them felt different. Stronger. More certain. Simone stopped near the doors. "Thank you," she said. Harrison looked at her. "For what?" "For seeing something in me when most people did not." Harrison shook his head gently. "That is not what happened." Simone waited. Harrison's voice remained calm. "You made me see something." The words caught her off guard. Harrison glanced toward the city. Power makes it easy to stop listening. You reminded me not to. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Simone smiled. A genuine smile. That might be the nicest thing a billionaire has ever said to a waitress. Harrison smiled back. Then I should probably stop while I am ahead. They both laughed softly. It was a simple moment, but it felt important. Not because it changed everything overnight. Because it changed something real. Trust had grown. Respect had deepened. And as Simone stepped out into the New York evening, she realized the question that had followed her all afternoon no longer mattered. She finally understood why Harrison had stood beside her. It was not because he saw a waitress. It was because he saw a person. And for the first time, she fully trusted that he meant it.